Hi there, this is Michael Becker. And in this session, we have with us today Virginie Debris. She is the Chief Product Officer at the Global Messaging Services Organization, and she happens to be in France today, in Paris. So Virginie, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks to you for having me there.
Awesome. Now, let's start with, can you give a brief description of who you are, what your job is, what you do, and what is your role in when it comes to personal data identity?
So at first, GMS is a provider for providing messaging services to enterprises and operators. So we're really the man in the middle, trying to merge those two worlds between the enterprises and the operators. And on the enterprises side, of course, the need for KYC is know your customer is bigger and bigger. And what is important for the enterprises today is to ensure that they are delivering the message to the right person, that they know their person fairly well enough in order to provide them as much services as they can, and to be useful for the end user, right? So that's what GMS would like to do. And then what is my role at GMS is to handle the product. So in reality, trying to understand what are the market demands for new products and develop those products and put them and bring them go to market. So in reality, on the personal data, on the personal the personal identity, I would say the important. I would say that the important thing for us is to, again, listen to our customers. Our customers are saying, I want to know who is my end user. Who am I talking to? Am I speaking to the right person in front of me?
No, let me pause you right there. And this is me, why, yep. Right? Specifically, why do they want to know who that person is? So you hear about like marketing, right time, right place, right message, right? So from a marketing and advertising person, we may want to know who that person is, so that we could be, providing the proverbial relevant advertising. But is that the only why, exactly. Or are there other whys? Why do businesses want to know who this person is?
There are multiple reasons. One of the very basic things in the in ensuring is just ensuring that I will deliver the message the right way to the right person. So, for example, for me, ensuring that this phone number is actually really in use, and this is not a bullshit number that anybody did put in the form somewhere, is already an important information for my enterprises, because otherwise they might pay for delivering a message that actually will never get delivered because the person never existed. Mm-hmm. And that's the very basic need that we could have, up to very, very, very complex needs, which would be to score a particular phone number against the various information that person had given inside the forms that they filled in. So is that person really the person that he pretended? Am I talking to the right person concretely? Why? Because I'm sending, for example, a one-time password. Why? Because I am willing to because I'm a retailer and I'm willing to ensure that that the account that I'm creating for that person is not fraudulent. Items like that are very, very concrete problems that we can see today, and that identity information are important to solve those problems for enterprises.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting. You started out at the beginning of your conversation where you started using the words personal data, and you shook your head a little bit.
That's true.
And then instantly jumped to identity, as if they were different things. So what's the distinction between identity and personal data within this kind of ecosystem?
That's fairly interesting, because the personal data for me is something that we at various stages, so we as aggregators, MNOs, but also various enterprises, will need to protect. So we need to make sure, because of all the rules and regulations at the moment, we need to protect the personal data, but at the same time we need to get enough information in order to secure a transaction, or in order to give the best information possible to the enterprises so that they can serve the customer better. So that's where identity is fundamental for the enterprises to provide the best service that they can. But then we need to do that respecting the personal data, and to provide that personal data without also breaching the law and breaching all the regulations related to the protection of their personal data. And that's where it's kind of complex to juggle with it. That's the complexity. That's part of the complexity for us.
But when we talk about identity, so for example, when I'm signing up to that form and I'm providing that phone number,
yep,
that is an identifier. That is not necessarily someone's identity, and it's not necessarily tied to say credentials that truly validate who I am. And if and arguably, I was reading a research study just this morning where they said, give me 15 demographic data points about anyone, and with 99.8% reliability, we can resolve who they are. So having credentials,
that's the entire issue.
Right. So having credentials, deterministic credentials necessarily aren't enough. Having data attributes aren't enough. Somehow you need to combine them together to really understand and quote unquote know this customer.
Yes, again, that's where having the knowledge of the personal data is not an issue as such. The issue is always how do you use it? How do you ensure that you use it for the right purpose with the right authorization from the end user? That's the entire complexity that we're having at the moment. Or that's one of the multiple complexities that we're having with it, right? Is are we genuinely authorized by the end user in order to use that personal data for the meaning that we are trying to use it for at the moment? That's where the complexity is, and also because in the chain you have multiple people. And when you were talking earlier on about the various attributes that we could get to get the identity, there are also some attributes which are very dynamic and which are therefore provided by the MNOs themselves. Then we need to ensure, and we need to be able to have a comfortable relationship with the MNO, and the MNO needs to be comfortable enough with us in order to make sure that the usage that we're going to make of that personal data is going to be the appropriate one. So there needs to be a kind of chain of trust all along between the MNO, the provider like us, the enterprise, and whoever else is in the middle of that, in order to ensure that the personal data is secured and used in an appropriate way that was previously authorized by the end user.
So the question I had was in here that I think one of the key purposes you noted was purpose. Right.
Yes.
And yes. How do we understand purpose? So there's transactional purpose, sure, but then purpose. So purpose, maybe I can ask it this way. There's we'll call it the purpose continuum, right? Where you have great, perfect clarity of purpose. I'm sending you a receipt. I'm sending you a one-time passcode in the context of messaging. To pretty gray to obscure purposes like I'm going to send you this ad because I think you want it, right? So how do we understand and intuit purpose?
So I think the way, again, each of the various vendors and players in that industry might have different answers to that. The way we particularly handle this at GMS is fairly simple. Is we try at the moment to really limit the personal data and the various identity information that we share with enterprises, because we have no way to control completely the purpose. And for places where we understand what is the purpose, it has to be fully customized and discussed and project-based, I would say. And that's where the complexity of that entire PD&I subject is that as it comes to personal data, we need to be extremely careful with it, and therefore it takes a lot of tailor-made solution and a lot of manual work and legal discussions as well. There are also multiple legal implications to that make it very complex to be provided in a I would say in an industrialized way. I'm also looking for answers to that question. I don't have yet all those answers.
Well, and frankly, I don't
working on that.
No one does really yet, but that's the reason why we're having this conversation. So
exactly.
One of the questions I have for you is, so let's go back to the original question. What is the personal data and identity marketplace? Is there one?
There are multiple ones, I think. Again, for me, there are multiple types of information that our customers are looking for. There are those types of information that are related very simply to, some of our customers mentioned it too. I need to clean up my database. People just filling forms, and I just need to clean it up, and I need someone to help me verifying that the static information that I get into my database are still valid. That phone number is still valid. That phone number and mail address matching, and so on. And that's a clean up a database. That's a very simple use case, for example, and that's very easy as well for us then, because they share something. And then we just have to clean it up. Some more complex, some other interesting use cases are much more dynamic, and there I will use the keywords dynamic attributes that we could get from the MNOs, like whether or not there is a risk of that particular phone number being used for fraudulent reasons at the moment. Because people would like to secure a transaction, because people have a doubt on a specific phone number being used in a wrong environment or by the wrong people. Then in that case, we verify some dynamic attributes with the MNOs, like the permanent call forwarding, like the fact that there was SIM swap, as there was a lot of noise in Western Europe around the SIM swap issues in the past. There are multiple dynamic attributes that we could check. The location is as well this one. So for example, with some operators we could say, okay, a bank, for example, could tell you there was a transaction being made in that country. Can you confirm that that person is around? The mobile phone of that person is in that country, and then we ask the question to the MNO, yes or no. That's
so in that case, you're using the location of the phone as a proxy for being near the individual.
Yes.
Now that now if my phone was stolen, right, that very well might not be the case, but we're doing the best we can, right? True. So
exactly.
But again, let's go back to,
and nothing is perfect, we need to admit that, nothing is perfect, we need to admit that. And again, that's where all those more and more the discussions that we're also having is that those dynamic attributes or static attributes are one thing. What we are much more evolving towards is a scoring instead. Exactly like what Visa and MasterCard are doing in real time for your banking transaction, which is to give a scoring to your transaction. I truly believe that one of the very simple way to solve the personal data constraints is also to score it. Instead of providing information back, is to score it. You have a good scoring, you are probably the person that you pretend to be, or you have a good scoring, it means that this transaction can move on because we believe that this is the right person that we are talking to.
And how would a scoring system like that work? What would you be scoring me against? What would be the parameters?
So multiple things. For example, if I'm trying to send a one-time PIN to your phone number, again, I would give you a bad score if I've seen that there was a SIM swap in the past 24 hours, or if I can see that you have a permanent call forwarding on your number. These are usually stuff that you should tell me that there is something getting wrong with your phone number. There are multiple other ways to look at that, but these are the very simple ways to look at that. Or if, for example, coming back to the retailers, if you would fill in a form with a certain number of information and you would share it with me in order for me to double check that, I won't share the information back with you as an enterprise, but I would compare those information, and if a certain number of information are incorrect, then the scoring would be bad. These are examples.
Got it.
Again, exactly like what the banking system would do.
Yeah. I understand. But again, and so let me go back to the marketplace discussion again, though. So you mentioned that there are multiple marketplaces, and like, who are the actors in the marketplace? And when I'm talking about a personal data and identity marketplace, what's coming to mind for me is, there is a market to be selling and exchanging personal data and identity. So personal data attributes and identity capability. That's how would you define the marketplace in that way as well? And if so, who are the primary actors?
So for me, there are people, so there are various players in that market, okay? So I set aside, obviously, the end user and the enterprises that are willing to get that, right? People in the middle. People in the middle, for me, are vendors like the very, very basic ones that have tons of information are the MNOs. So the MNOs implication is fundamental because they have a lot of static information, because obviously they know you, they know your address, they know your gender, they know your age, they know multiple things on you. Plus they have also some dynamic attributes. So MNOs for me are really key in that sense. Then
and can you define an MNO in this context? And give me an example.
Operator. I'm, for example, an Orange France subscriber. Orange France has my mailing address, they get my gender, they get my age, they get my obviously my bank account. They have everything. They know me better than anybody else, and they know exactly where I am.
Right. And how long you've been there and how long you've done it. So what's interesting about an MNO,
and which kind of mobile phone I have, how much data I use, am I roaming or not? They know everything. Literally everything.
So what's interesting about the MNO is, though, they're not, most of them are not just B2B players, but they're also B2C players, right? So they're playing a dual role of being of service to the direct consumer and providing, in many cases, cable, carrier, mobile phone providing, publishing, content publishing, et cetera. So they're providing that material. They're advertisers in their own right, but they're also ad networks. And then they have this backhaul infrastructure for facilitating carriage of messaging and the interoperability of that between networks. So I see them. I agree with you. They're interesting linchpin player. So how does one go? How would one go about valuing the personal data and identity marketplace? What do we use to value it?
So let me just, if I may, let me just continue on the marketplace.
Yeah, please.
Just talk about the other players, because for me these are the MNOs, but many of the MNOs are rather not really. And again, keep in mind that the goal for all of that is to, by respecting all the personal data and privacy, is to provide the service to the enterprises so that you can monetize it. So for most of the MNOs, they have the big players, the big enterprises as customers, but they are still not very not probably very easy in selling this, or they don't have that in their portfolio. So there are two kinds of other players like GMS. So we provide today multiple services to enterprises, and PD&I is just one part of the services that we provide to them, and that they're eager to buy from us. They know us, they trust us, they have a relation with us. So what else can you offer GMS to me as an enterprise in order to help my daily life? So they come to aggregators like us, and all our competitors, that's the same. And then you have that third category, which is probably in the middle between the MNO and players like us. We could go, GMS, for example, can go and is going to MNOs directly, but we are also using some players in the middle who are those PD&I, I would say, or identity specialists, I would say, identity vendors, or people that basically are creating those databases and getaways and infrastructure in order to handle those data. So I'm thinking there about people like XConnect, people like TMT, people like iConnective. These are people that are those players that I would say in the middle that GMS and its competitors are using as well in order to get this data.
Okay. What about within this marketplace, data brokers?
What do you mean by that?
Like in the United States, the examples would be Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, Axiom, and 4,000 other companies that participate in the essentially aggregation of public data, private data exchanges. They'll create networks to be able to say buy users' credit card purchase history, and then aggregate that up and sell it.
For me, that's exactly the same kind of that third PD&I vendors that I would categorize them in, because we get data. We, as being aggregators, we get data from various sources, including those people.
Yeah, I understood you initially when you were explaining the identity vendors as people providing the identity infrastructure to be able to effectively manage identity.
No. My apologies. I poorly explained myself. Not only the infrastructure, of course, the data itself.
Okay, so it's that. So there's an infrastructure and data layer of companies, and there are many, right? Like in the
yes, there are tons of them.
Okay, so and then and so in that and it's interesting then, because so you've got the businesses who are working with the customers, and the M&O is, as you said, a critical linchpin because they are both a business in their own right, but also the customer.
Yes.
But they also so they work with both other businesses as well as consumers directly. And then you have the aggregators behind you, and then those layers. So with that in mind, how does one go about valuing what would you use to value this market? Do we look at the market cap of the specific companies playing within that space? Do we look at the value of the data itself? Because
that's very complex.
There's different approaches, econometrics approaches for doing that. Have you ever put any thoughts to that?
So we've had multiple approaches, and what we found out is that whatever positioning that you try to make, you need to have the very pragmatic approach. What's in there for the enterprise customer? Mm-hmm. What is the perceived value for them? I.e., what is it that? And a very simple example is the fraud. How much do they risk if there is a fraud, and therefore how much are they ready to pay in order to avoid that fraud?
Okay.
And we had the conversation in the past with one of our enterprise customers, and we were measuring the potential fraud that they have compared to the potential total cost for them to verify the identity before.
Got it.
And usually that's a very interesting business case that you're able to make out of that.
Yeah, you're about to lose $1 billion, spend $500 million, and you just saved $500 million, right? Easy math.
Exactly. What's the point, right? And that's it. And that's usually the best business case that you can make. That's a simple one because of the fraud. That's usually the way we handle that, is what is in there for the enterprise itself. And that's where back to what we originally talked about, is this is still very tailor-made and not very industrialized, because you need to talk through those business cases with your enterprise customers first. You need to understand the enterprise business very intensively in order to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. As we're having this talk though too, so I think a lot of the times we will in industry measure the marketplace based on kind of risk or expense or operational efficiency.
Yes.
Yes. But then on the flip side, I was just reading a McKinsey study from 2013, and and they had suggested, and I'm starting to see this more and more. The flip side of that too is to start measuring the industry not on expense, but on essentially potential, right? And so McKinsey was suggesting that unleashing interoperable open data models would add, in their estimate, $3 trillion to the world's economies. Another more recent estimate would be that opening up data flow would add 12% to a country's GDP. Right. And not just, and again, that's all data, but, obviously personal data is a subset of that. And it, in other words, the idea is improve your products, improve education, improve healthcare, improve health, improve financial services through the flowing of personal data, and essentially both for the business, but also utility for the individual. What do you think of that?
Yes. No, I am totally in agreement, but I would put a caveat to that. I think before the COVID crisis, everybody was eager to talk about what would be the expected revenue. Let's talk about projections. And what we've found out is that from the COVID situation, enterprises are much, much more pragmatic and much more feet on the ground. And expectations are good. Projections are wonderful. McKinsey is just doing their job by doing that. The reality is that what enterprises need now is to get something tangible and that they can show to their management, and with a quick return on investment, because multiple enterprises suffered from that. And I'm talking there especially about the retailers, for example, in our markets. They highly suffered from the crisis, and right now what they need is things that can have a very short return on investment in terms of timelines. So
in other words, to generate top line revenue.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, so we've understand. Let me kind of paraphrase what I've heard you say. So there is a market for personal data and identity. It's a big market. Clearly. There are. Could you put a number on it though? What do you think?
No, I won't try that.
Hundreds of billions, trillions. Don't know.
I don't know, but that's massive. I think that this is as such a huge market. Putting a number is difficult because as well, it's going to be very, very difficult to, in fact, identify what is that personal data and identity and what is pure data. So I won't put a number on that. That's too difficult, because you have many companies also that would consider that crunching their own business intelligence with their own data would be PD&I. That's not exactly what my definition would be. So our definition might be different on that. I'm very careful on that. No, I won't put any number. I'm not good at that.
I'm fine. But you raised a really interesting point, because when you start thinking about personal data, well, who's the person? Is it a human, an individual? But again, in our society, in Western society, companies are people too, right? And so companies have personal data.
Exactly.
And that raises a really interesting element. So in that regard, one could argue that the entire world's economy is personal data.
Exactly. So where do you
everything is personal data,
right? Exactly. And also we've been discussing with some of our enterprise customers and MNO customers, by the way, on how we could help them to in fact manage the data which is already going through us, in order to get some information on that, and to get some analysis on this, and to get how much we get huge amount of data from our customers already at hand. So how can we use that for them, for themselves, but also for ourselves, for our own business intelligence, in fact, and how much productization can we do out of that? How much of that can we do as a product for them and even for ourselves? That's touchy, huh?
Yeah, and again,
is it PD&I?
Yeah, and so then that raises another question within this marketplace: is who owns the data, right? And is data a property that someone can own, or is data a common good with mutual intersecting interests? And everyone within the boundaries has some right to use and refine. I mean, how do we have those conversations?
No, but that's a very good question, and I don't have the answer, but we did ask ourselves the question because of that business intelligence that I just talked to you about. Because at a certain point, we started saying, "Oh, let's use that for our own purpose." But in reality, this data is not mine. And some of my colleagues would tell me, "Yeah, but MNOs are using that data, which is transmitted through their network. Although this is not their data either. So why couldn't we? We're a network as such as well. But the MNO cannot use that, or can use that as soon as as long as this is aggregated information, as long as this is for statistical purposes. You cannot, you're not supposed to be able to go beyond because of the personal of the data protection, and that's the complexity there.
Well, and I do think it does raise some, on a social level, though, it raises some really interesting conundrums, because, you know, if you just think about market fairness, you know, for example, you know, how many people are sitting on, say, Microsoft Azure or Amazon, and all of this data flowing through those networks, you know, or say Google for that matter. You know, my corporate data is not theirs. You know, even though it's on their networks, that doesn't necessarily wouldn't give them a right to build statistical models or analysis from the analyzing of my data, even though I happen to be hosting it on their servers.
Exactly, but guess what? They are doing it though. And the question is, as long as they are doing it in order to improve the business that they are doing for you, you're fine with it. What you don't want is them to use that in order to either make money out of that, or to publicize it, or, you know, again, this is very difficult to find the limit where, and usually the point is that I'm happy for them to use that data as long as it's good for me.
Yes.
I'm not happy for them to use that data when it doesn't, it's not good for me, but good for me is not potentially what is good for the others, right?
Right. Well, and again, and again, maybe this is a very Western American left coast mindset, but you know, define good for me, and, you know, if you're off then able to make trillions of dollars based on my contribution of the data, where's my revenue share? Where's my song royalty for the information that I provided that I spent a lot of money, energy, time, labor producing, to which you turned around and used to make yourself gazillions of dollars.
But this is what Google is doing on a daily basis.
Right. So again, I mean, and think about it. So in that context, you know, there have been many that argue that, you know, labor, you know, personal data generation by individuals, for example, with their mobile phone is actually their labor, and therefore they should be compensated for that labor. Have you put that, you know, is that could be possibly a direction of where this marketplace goes?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Would there be any way for Google to pay you in order to watch your advertisement? Do they pay you?
They could. I mean, define pay though. I mean,
but they don't.
They don't, but they could. All right. So yeah, we're running short on time. So let me ask you a couple of questions then. So we've talked about the market and where we go. Based on this background, now that we've talked about this market, what do people need to know? What do government, private institutions, public institutions, and the individuals need to know?
So I can mostly talk about the private institutions, because we don't work that much with public institutions. We do a little bit, but for the moment they are not interested in such kind of items, because probably it's too complex for them, or they solve it elsewhere, potentially directly with the MNOs. So for the private institutions, what's interesting, that's what your question is about, right? What is interesting for them in the PD&I, right? Yeah, all those. So what I was talking about, all those static attributes, those dynamic attributes. Again, the goal being ultimately for those institutions to validate, to either help in the user experience. So some of our customers, for example, are willing to get the static information because they only want you to type in your mobile number and don't have to fill in the form, the very complex form that usually people have to request you when you're subscribing to a new internet website or whatever. But also the dynamic information in order to either fight against fraud, or to provide you a service which is much more adapted to where you are currently sitting, or whatever the different matters that could be interesting in the dynamic. But also the scoring. I think the scoring is something very important, because for many companies, getting the data is not really what matters. Getting a feeling on whether or not this is okay either the transaction can be okay or the person is really who it pretends to be is okay. I think the scoring is something which we are hearing about more and more. Complexity is always how do you score on which criteria and so on. That's another topic. Don't bring me there. That's complex problem as well. But this is what they're asking for.
Well, I just imagine the bias that can get that comes into any algorithm is a challenge. But so again, so let's summarize again though. So what I think we need to know is there's a lot of data out there. There are a number of players. From a no perspective, consumers need to know that companies are trying to do their best to know who you are, so that they can provide you a valued service, serve you better, and mitigate fraud risk, and not just for themselves, but for you.
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
So that's what I heard you say. I think so. That's what like a consumer needs to know. Businesses need to know that consumers are concerned, and they, and so therefore they need some transparency and such like this.
Exactly.
And I think regulators want to know that there's a certain level of fairness going on here, that there's justice, that there is no one constituent is getting overly harmed or not.
That's the GDPR, right? It's on a need to know basis. So I need to ensure that the person is really who it pretends to be. I need to know that, because I'm gonna deliver some goods, for example, to that new address that person is pretending to have right now, and is it really that person that requested that change?
Okay, so that's what we need to know now. And you've now started to talk a little bit about what do we need to do. And so in the context of do, one of the things that I heard you say is industry is now evaluating a scoring mechanism to essentially to develop a predictive scoring mechanism of accuracy of resolving to that real human, so that we can actually efficiently and safely perform a transaction. So that's one thing. And so one of the things we need to do is, how do we, and I'm interpreting what I heard you say. So the question is, what do we need to do is, how do we actually build out a scoring algorithm that works and is not necessarily biased?
I think that at first we need to listen to the enterprise's needs. So what we are currently doing is really understand their needs and which are the criteria that would be important for them. And then probably we need to meet in certain associations, like what the MEF is trying to do, in order for all of us to agree on those kind of criteria and scoring mechanism. But I think as well, one of the important items that I would like to reemphasize again is the mobile network operators. I think that we also need, as an industry, to work with the mobile network operators so that they can provide us with the data, taking into account that there needs to be some kind of certification, there needs to be some kind of insurance from our side, on our side, in order to ensure that the data will be used properly, genuinely. But we need to get access to that data. And the complexity today for the mobile network operators is clearly that in order to give access to that data, there is a technical problem and there is an ethical problem. The ethical problem is a very big problem for them. The legal part of it is very important, so we need to sort it out. There is also a technical problem that we need to work out with them, but we need to all sit together in order to solve those problems. We have some ideas on that. We have many players in the industry that are proposing some solutions on that. But I think it's important that we get access to that, and at first, because that's important for the enterprises and the end users. There is a need, so we need to reply to that need. But this is also good for the market itself. And we are making money out of that. The mobile network operator is going to make money out of that. It's a win-win for all the players in that industry, really.
So let me back up, and let's just zero on these three things then. So I think another thing we need to do is to solve the technical problem, or address the ethical problem, but you also put in a third, a legal problem, right? Or so there's so and I'm presumably ethics and legality are slightly different. There's law, and regulation, and then there's ethics, which is like the moral code.
True. We have to solve all of those because from the ethical perspective, many subscribers quite rightly, and many MNOs quite rightly as well, are asking the question on how is it genuinely, are those information used for genuine purpose, and we need to have an answer to that. That's a real problem.
So I don't think I fully understood. So the ethical problem is what? So maybe you can, in one sentence each, can you define for me what the technical problem is, what the ethical problem is, and what the legal problem is?
So for me, the technical problem is how do we get that data out of the MNO network? How do we get access to that data without the MNO having to implement some very complex things that they don't want to implement? They don't have time, they don't have the money for that, and so on. That's the technical problem.
But in some regards, though, they could just open it up. So it's not just about enabling access. There's some other criteria, correct?
No, it's not that simple because you have many of the static information are inside their CRM, for example. They can't open their CRM that way. That doesn't make sense, right?
No, I mean, I was being a bit rhetorical when I asked the question. I mean, the point being is there's IP preserving considerations, there's privacy conserving considerations, there's obviously cybersecurity conserving considerations. So when the technical problem is not just making the flows, opening up the data, it's making sure that we're opening up the data with the context of privacy, security, and governance in mind.
Yes, and that you find also a way to monetize that. So if I put myself in the shoes of the MNOs, I would also try to understand how to monetize that part.
Okay, so we have a fourth problem, and a business model problem, a monetization model problem.
Yes, but for me, that's true. You could position it that way. You're right.
Right, because the technology is just the technology, and the next question is how do we pay for it?
Yes, but usually the two things will come together because the solution will have to be solving all those problems. In fact.
Well, and I think that's the important part. I mean, it's, everything's independent and interdependent in this world, but we need to somewhat tease it apart to understand the elements.
Okay. Completely.
So the business problem is understanding how do we pay for this? How do we generate enough revenue to pay for this or get enough investment to pay for it? Technical problem is how do we enable
that's also the investment, which is today the issue of the MNO, right? Because the MNOs today do have a lot of investments to make on many other subjects. So this subject might not be on top of their pile of the investments that they have to go with. that's also the concern.
So really quickly, then, how would you then define the ethical problem and legal problem?
So the legal problem is the easy one, right? You have all those data protection rules. You have to ensure that you're still on sync with the contract that you signed with your own customers in order to protect their data. You have to also be compliant, of course, with the regulation within your country. So that's for me a simple, easy to understand. Ethical is much more. It's always the issue, right? Where would the MNO consider that that's also a problem of trust? That's a fundamental matter of trust. If the MNO would trust whoever is connected to them in order to get that data, or would trust the enterprise which is going to get that data, they are going to know that there will be an ethical use of the data. The problem is, will these data be used properly for ethical reasons and for valid reasons? That's a concern that we've heard multiple times. Aside from all, and obviously then immediately the MNOs are saying, oh, by the way, is it legal? But then that's also fundamentally something that people are worried about. Is it going to be used for the right purpose? That's probably the summary of it.
Yeah, and again, I guess the hard question from all of this is who gets to determine what the right purpose is?
That's the entire issue. That's right. The entire issue.
Right, because my right purpose is not necessarily your right purpose.
Exactly, and that's where the issue stands. I agree. Right. And it might differ also from culture to culture. Huh? It's obviously different in many countries. It's different for many enterprises. It could be really different company cultures, different cultural different country cultures. Yeah, that's tough. That's a tough answer.
So in other words, what we're, and so that I think this is really gets to the root of the problem is we're trying to systematize, essentially the physical human condition into this kind of virtual environment. And essentially what we're doing is we're taking 10,000 years of evolution and trying to convert it digitally in 60.
Yeah. And we are trying to monetize it, which is adding on top of the issue.
And we're trying to monetize it, which raises all these issues of unfairness and or fairness or justice and such. And and then one, and some people I've talked to is discussed like too, like when you look at a marketplace, you then naturally have a natural consideration of equanimity in exchange, and you want to find that balance of benefit to risk ratio. And is any one individual actor taking on more risk than the other? And that's an interesting challenge. Well, hey, this is we've overextended our time, but thank you so much.
I know. I need to go. That's
I know, but this was fabulous.